Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook. I'm your host, Robin Hunicke, and I'm here today with the fantastic Jesse Schell of Schell Games. Jesse has a long and esteemed career in gaming. He's a gaming educator as well as a creator and a designer, has a fantastic philosophy on life, and I'm super excited to be hearing from him today. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Hey, Robin, glad to be here.
It's 2020. We're here together after a little bit of technical intervention. My internet decided to fail this morning, so thank you for your patience. How have you been handling things in this work-at-home environment in the pandemic? What's your experience of 2020 been so far?
Certainly professionally, it's been an interesting challenge. Our studio has always had a focus on face-to-face interaction, and to suddenly have that yanked away from us was certainly a big cultural change. To try and figure out how to do everything that we do creatively online has certainly been a big challenge. And I think the bigger challenge of it is we have kind of 4 lines of business of our studio, and one of them is interactive experiences for theme parks and museums. And I know we've been leaning pretty heavily into that in 2019 and in early 2020, and all of a sudden that stuff was in big trouble. Blessedly, though, we've put a lot of time and energy into VR over the last few years, and that's really taken off. And we've been working on some games for health, and we were finding that both health and also educational-oriented games have kind of have also blossomed a bit during this time. So as a studio, we're doing okay because our weight has shifted, but it certainly has been a little bit of a pivot.
That's great. I mean, in a way, you know, it's always a challenge when something changes unexpectedly around your business, but to be able to be flexible and to see it as an opportunity to do new work is awesome. Tell me a little bit about what it's like doing games for medical applications, because this is something that actually comes up a lot around me in conversation, but I don't really have an experience of working in that space. What's it like?
Well, it's interesting to understand that there are many ways to create games in the medical space. We've created some that have been directly for patients, games that are designed to help with weight loss, games that are designed for smoking cessation. And some of them are for adults. There's others that we've done for younger people. We'd done a game called Play Forward, working with the Yale Medical Play to Prevent Lab, and that was all about HIV prevention for young teenagers. We're currently doing more work with them right now, a game about opioid awareness. And then there are other games that you do that are not some are patient-centered for therapy, some are preventative, but then you have others that are for medical professionals. We did one called Night Shift, working with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, that was all about training emergency room doctors to better handle trauma situations. And the interesting insight there was that the most effective way to do that training was to do it in a way that emotionally engaged the doctors, because that emotional engagement made them remember the experiences and lessons a lot better. So I find that there's a lot of variety in the domain of health-related games.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It seems to me that, like, you know, in many ways, games kind of works its way into different verticals, as they say, over time. And the medical vertical was one that was like kind of starting to be talked about a lot in, I would say, maybe 2016, 2017. And I know that there were some AR games that I saw around medical training as recently as 2018. And it seems like maybe this is an area that's starting to get bigger. Do you feel like it's harder to reach someone in this profession because they have such a strong need to be focused on like really bare bones reality? Or do you think that there's an opportunity there to sort of get creative in the ways that you that you engage with say a doctor? I imagine, I mean, I guess this is probably bias on my part, but I imagine doctors being very serious and not wanting to play video games about work, but maybe that's just my bias.
No, it's a very interesting question. The night shift game in particular was interesting because the reason the project came about was an earlier version had been created that was all business. It was all, no, we're just going to do, like, you're going to do some simulations and you're going to practice the right situations. And they found that it wasn't especially effective at actually changing behavior. And Dr. Mohan, who we'd been working with, she had a theory that getting emotional engagement would really matter. But she knew this was a little bit of a weird thing to do because you're right, doctors can be very serious. They're not looking for a lot of fluffy nonsense around what they do. And so there was definitely some resistance with some doctors who tried it. But even the doctors who were resisting it, they were kind of getting pulled in, and it did seem to work better for them. And I guess another aspect of it was this game in particular was not designed as this is a formal training session that you're going to do as part of your workday, but this was designed rather as something extracurricular that you might do in your spare time if you felt like it. And so when things are in that zone, having more entertainment-oriented aspects to them makes more sense because people are looking for a break. And one other thing worth noting, it was almost impossible for us as developers to fully play this game because as part of the game, you actually have to take in a bunch of, medical data and then make a proper diagnosis. And most of us just were like, I don't know what this data is. I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't even know what these terms are. But doctors were often quite excited to be able to exercise their expertise in the zone of a video game. And so for them, it was sort of nice that they, like a thing that they already are experts at, that they could suddenly be experts in the game as well. That really helped pull a lot of them in, I think.
That's really fascinating. I actually had some students last year that made a game that was sort of based on the concept of having to manage a triage center in a battle zone. And so the idea was that patients would come in various states of disrepair, and your job was essentially to figure out, okay, how many of these patients can I see in this time frame before I get a re-up of supplies, and how can I make the supplies last as long as possible? Mm-hmm. And when they pitched the game to me, I was like, wow, that sounds really depressing and grim, and I'm not sure I would enjoy it. And it ended up becoming really compelling because it did really shine a light on a lot of the sort of difficult decisions that one would have to make in a triage center, and the ways in which a little bit of fast thinking on your feet and being able to remember important details that might seem small to a normal person, like how much gauze is left, would have a really deep impact on the way that the total stats of basically lives saved over time. And making, in some cases, a less aggressive intervention would also save you time, so you could treat more patients, And of course, again, my feeling was like, well, it will be bloody and grim, but if you handle it the right way, actually, you can focus on the, I guess what they would have called in my grad student days, the case-based reasoning of doctors, which has been, I think, a subject of quite a lot of study. So that's fascinating. I mean, I guess one of the things it makes me think about is the fact that you do tend to work in a lot of really interesting areas, emerging technology areas where you get to learn while you work. Is that a motivation for you? Is that something that happened on purpose, or did it just happen that way?
I've always been the kind of person who likes variety. I love to go the places no one else is thinking about going, and learning what you need to learn in order to get there. And that goes to a lot of places. That goes to how do you turn a theme park ride into a video game? How do you turn medical training into a video game? How can I turn a toy into a game? And I just find that I find the challenges of kind of going outside the box in lots of different ways just incredibly fun, and our studio has attracted people who just they love these kind of unusual challenges. So over time, we've kind of gotten a reputation as being a studio that sort of likes to go to the new places and the places that people haven't been, and for me, that's just tremendous fun.
In your work, you also engage with a student body like I do. Talk a little bit about how that learning mindset has influenced your work as a teacher and an educator.
Yeah, so I'm in an interesting position because I run Schell Games as a studio, but then I also do help teach over at the Entertainment Technology Center at Carnegie Mellon, and that's always been a really wonderful. I've been doing that about 18 years now, and it's a really wonderful synergy because my industry work helps make me relevant as an educator, because if you're going to survive in industry, you kind of have to know what's going on and where the industry is headed. But at the same time, my ability to work with students who are experimenting in the academic space lets me kind of get into a mindset that most people in industry don't get a chance to get into, because typically in industry you have to focus on things that you're pretty sure are going to work, whereas in academia you can kind of fool around with all kinds of weird things that, like, I don't know, that might work, that might not work, it might not work now, maybe it'll work in 10 years. And so you get to try a lot of experiments that I often find end up being very relevant in the future.
So, I guess one of the things that that really applies to is virtual reality itself, right? I mean, like, you were present in the very first wave of VR investigations in the waybacks, and then have been able to participate in it since then. And your studio has created a lot of really interesting games and experiments in VR. Do you see it as a now thing? I mean, are you essentially saying, like, okay, it's here, it's really real?
Oh yeah, it is absolutely here. It is absolutely really real. You look at the Oculus Quest 2, which is now $299 and has such a wonderful collection of experiences on it, and is selling out incredibly fast. It is not only here, but it's definitely here to stay. It is now going to be a persistent part of the game industry, and it is going to be, for at least the next 5 years, a growing part of the game industry. So I'm absolutely. I mean, I've been working on VR since the early '90s. As part of the Disney VR studio, building Disney Quest, and I've been teaching VR classes at Carnegie Mellon for years and years. So when it first really started to, when Oculus first started to kind of really push into the consumer space, I was pretty interested, and so we got involved pretty early. And at this point, I think we've shipped something like 15 different VR and AR experiences of various different kinds. Our most popular ones have been the puzzle game, the escape room game, I Expect You to Die, and and also our sword fighting game, Until You Fall. Those have both been doing incredibly well for us. And as the market grows, it's going to enable studios to make larger and larger budget titles. And so it really does feel like we're in a really strong growth path in VR right now.
Well, as you know, I'm a fan as well. And when Phenomena started doing VR and AR titles, was, everything was so experimental. And we still have a pair of the very, very first touch controllers that were ever released as like a little trophy. Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are skeptics. And so maybe you and I are in a small minority of people that really do believe that there's a future there. I feel like VR gives you the opportunity to create really interesting embodied experiences, very similar to the kinds of things that you would experience in a dark ride or in an interactive context like at a theme park. And so the connection between those two worlds seems to me really interesting to explore. And eventually we will get back to in-person entertainment and gatherings and things like this. It may take a few years, but we'll get back there. How do you think we can stay connected to that space as we work in VR in our experiments? Like we're currently developing 2 VR titles as well. And like, I keep thinking that like VR and AR titles have this tenuous connection to being able to influence real reality in the very near future. And it's just been extended because of COVID, but it hasn't gone away. So what's your thinking about that, about maintaining the sort of creative line to that connection so that when we do get back into in-person and sort of theme park type events, we can really leverage what we're learning in the space?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one thing, just taking a step back real quick, I've always, as a studio strategy, I've always been really big into flexibility, because my mindset's always been about the long term. There are a lot of studios that they pick a certain genre or a certain technology and they just bet everything on that. And if the fashions change and that genre falls away, or that platform falls away, they get in real trouble. And that's never been interesting to me. I've always been interested in the people. I mean, for us, the studio is the people who work there. And if you want to keep the band together, you got to be able to change with the times. And so we've always had a big focus on being able to change that way. And so being future oriented helps with that, because you can see the opportunities coming. You can kind of take advantage of them. And when you're future oriented, you get in that sort of mindset of change, because the future is always going to be change. And so we've always kind of been there. And so this is partly why, like, we have the different lines of business. We've during COVID, we're kind of leaning away from theme parks and museums and leaning a little more into home entertainment and health. And that's fine. And that's all working out. And I guess I would say for VR, some people had been focused on location-based VR, the Void and places like that. Other people are focused on the home stuff. I think this is the right time to learn your lessons about what's working in the home space.
Yeah.
And then once you kind of get that there, be ready for that future when people are ready to kind of gather in groups again. And we're already, blessedly, some of the projects that we've been working on that were paused have already sort of come back into swing, because there's sort of a desire to kind of have them be ready to go when the world is ready to get back on their feet again and get out into the world and meet each other. So I think it's the right experiments for the right time, and make plans for what's coming in the future, but don't lean on it too hard.
So what excites you about the potential of sort of tetherless VR at this time? Like, what makes it an exciting space for you, and like what kinds of experiments have you been engaging in?
So the part that's exciting to me about VR is VR brings something that regular video games cannot bring. People think about VR as a technology for the eyes, as if it's just some kind of 3D glasses, but it's more than that. VR is really a technology for the body, because VR successfully creates the illusion that your body is in another place. And when you do it right, your body at some level buys into this. We see this all the time. We see experiences where, someone's working on solving a puzzle in VR, and they get kind of stuck, and they kind of stop and think, and they lean on a virtual wall with their real hand, and they realize, oh wait, that's not there. And like, of course, intellectually they knew it wasn't there, but something in their body, something subconscious about the relationship between my body position and the space around me, was believing it and was buying into it and was ready to kind of act as if it's real and kind of bring you into that space and that place. And that's powerful. That's just, that sense of presence and immersion is powerful and can't be done any other way. And so it's that intimacy, the intimacy of like picking up objects and manipulating them with your fingertips and looking closely at them, the intimacy that you can have with non-player characters and with remote player characters. There are things that are incredibly special about that, and so that's what gets me excited and interested, is just this sense of bringing your bodily self and your body thinking into a simulated world. To actually bring your body into a simulated world it's a wonderful thing to be able to play around with.
Do you think that social experiences in VR are going to become more popular now that people are sort of in their homes and spending a lot of time not being able to see loved ones and friends? Like, do you perceive it as an opportunity for us to innovate in that space?
It is an opportunity. The challenge VR has is what I often call the 10 million problem. A good rule of thumb, I think, for any technology is when there's less than 10 million of something in the world, probably none of your friends have it. And when there's more than 10 million of something in the world, probably at least one of your friends has it. So there's this switch flips once a technology gets up to 10 million, and you start to have all these social effects that start to happen because you're like, oh wait, you have it too? Oh, let's connect. But when it's all strangers, we connect with strangers very differently than we connect with friends. And this is, of course, what we've seen in the realm of social media. We had internet connectivity and chat rooms and things back before there was social media, but it was all about chat rooms mostly with strangers. The change with social media was the friends list and kind of connecting you with your real world friends. And that is all about the 10 million problem. And VR right now is below the 10 million mark. I think all told, if you count up all of the active headsets in the world, I would guess it's between 5 and 8 million right now. And
since those ecosystems don't play with each other, you can't really even count it like that.
Exactly. It doesn't even make a lot of sense to count it that way because I don't think the largest one would be the PlayStation one, which probably there are 5 million headsets total, but how many of them are actually active? So in terms of flipping that switch for VR, it's coming, but I don't think it's happening yet. So we're seeing a really weird thing with VR right now because on one level, people being at home and looking for things to do and looking to escape the four walls of their home, that's kind of pushing people towards trying VR. But one of the real strengths of the tethered system is the virality that it potentially has, because it's in a normal world, it's easy to just drop it in a backpack, pop over to a friend's house and say, hey, try this out. And of course, we can't do that right now. And VR is a thing, you see a TV commercial, you hear about it, and you're like, I don't know, I'm not convinced.
Yeah, it's experience-driven marketing, really.
Exactly. There was a very similar technology was the DVR. DVRs, of course, we look at and say that was a really successful technology. But if you look at how it took off, it was very slow. TiVo and the other early DVRs, they sold very slowly because people didn't comprehend it. You'd hear about it and you'd be like, I don't know, maybe. And you'd go to your friend's house and you'd see it and you'd be like, I guess you can pause TV. How much do I really care about that? But the real change that the DVR brings is how easy it is to kind of record shows and plan for that and be able to rewind. And until you've done it for a little while, you don't fully appreciate it. And so as a result, even though DVRs have been very successful, it took them a long time. It was like a 10-year slow growth pattern. And I think VR has some of that same challenge. And the pandemic, I think, has inhibited that a little bit. So
it's kind of ironic when you think about it. It's like you would imagine that this would be the perfect opportunity for everybody to get into their little pod and interact with one another. But as you say, it's just the barrier for so many people is kind of like, what is the value and what is the thing that is really going to drive it? I love VR, and I'm always astounded to show it to people who have never seen it. When they see it, and I've said this many times, it's like magic to them. They have really, really amazing experiences, showing a very simple game like Luna over and over again to older women who don't own a gaming console, but who are like, wow, I want this in my house and I want to show my grandkids. It's really amazing once you see it, but getting people to see it is the barrier. And it is kind of a really weird catch-22.
Yeah. So I think we're in a funny time right now where the pandemic is going to encourage early adopters to take the dive, probably more early adopters than would have normally. but the people who are kind of the next step after the early adopters are going to be less likely to do it. So I look at this as kind of a seeding period where we're going to have a lot of people who find it, discover it, and are excited about it, but they're kind of unable to share it with their friends. But then once the world gets back to normal, suddenly I think the sharing is going to happen very fast. It's just, that's just how the world goes.
You've seen a lot in your career throughout time. When you started in games, what was the new hotness? What was the thing that everybody was just like, wow, this is the best thing ever. Can't wait for it. What was that like? What was the young Jesse's experience of the new hotness of games?
Oh my gosh. Let's see. So I really, I fundamentally, it was a thing called video games, which is a new idea. I'll say it. I can remember back before there were video games. I remember I used to go to pinball arcades that would have like rows and rows of pinball machines, and then those like a couple arcade games started showing up in the mid 70s, Seawolf and a few of these others, kind of an interesting novelty, little racing games, really simple things. And then, 78 Space Invaders shows up and suddenly things start to change, and then Pac-Man. And so I was there to watch the whole arcade phenomenon, which is really hard for young people, I think, to relate to now. The idea that if you wanted to play video games, you had to go somewhere. And it was weird because like you couldn't have them in your house, but you could go somewhere, and for 25 cents, you could like go into the most high-tech video games in the world, right? And that was kind of a magical, exciting time. And that was in parallel with home computers showing up, computers actually coming into the home. And so it was this crazy swirl in the 70s and into the 80s of you had arcade games out there, and those were interesting and compelling. Dungeons and Dragons was flourishing, and so that was like a huge part of people's mindset. And then you had home consoles started to appear. The Atari 2600 appears, and you have this sort of mass market thing with arcade adaptations. And then you've got home computers of various kinds. The Apple II shows up, and the Commodore shows up with much richer games, but much deeper. Suddenly these deep story adventure games. And so I definitely was sort of inculcated into this world of, it was just such incredible exploration, and nobody knew what was right and what was coming next and what was going to be the best thing to do. And a thing that's really, we're finally going back to it now. If it was 1981 and you bought a home computer, you would plug it in, turn it on, and it would pop up a little prompt. It would say ready, and it popped up a prompt, and it basically wanted you to start typing computer code. That was it. Like that was what your default interface was. It wasn't, here, run these programs, run these apps. It was, please start typing code now. And so becoming a coder back then was it was almost natural. It was kind of, it was the way the computers wanted you to interact with them. And we went through a long period in the 90s and the 2000s where coding got kind of hidden. If you bought a computer and you actually want to write programs, it wasn't obvious how you would do it and how you would begin and how you would start. Yeah. But the change of YouTube and streaming and so many tools, and now we have games like Minecraft and Roblox that are basically once again inviting people to become coders. That's been a huge change.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. I was just saying to someone the other day, I remember when I was in, I guess, college and learning to program, I learned to program on a Mac. And if you wanted to, you could just drop into Maxbug and you could look at the entire stack in the memory and see where everything was. And if you were having a problem with a program that you were running or one that you had coded, you could just look at the memory and just figure out what was happening, like where the pointers were and what was going on and how things were changing. And you could step through programs very easily. And it was very clear that the program was a linear machine reading numbers off of a tape that you could change over time. It's so different now.
I think it's a lot like cars. You talk to people who were young people in the 40s and 50s, and of course they worked on cars because you could. You could like, hey, I'm going to improve my engine. Okay, you could get in there and do it. Now to kind of go into your own car, you cut the wrong wire and the airbag blows open, or it's like working on cars is way less realistic for the same reasons. As technology gets more complicated, it gets away from people a little bit.
I was looking at my newsfeed the other day, and there were a bunch of articles about politics and the election and all this stuff. And then there was just one that said, the world is getting too complex for us to understand it. And I thought, wow, that is true. I don't know why I'd want to read an article about that, but I do believe that in many ways it's true. And I think it's one of the reasons why it's so important for people to understand the true nature of computing and what computing really means. Like when we were still, I guess it was during the Obama administration, when we had a White House gaming czar and there was more of a focus on gaming and computer science in general. One of the things that I had been doing for a while was talking to folks in the CS for All initiative, which was an initiative to teach kids in all K through 12 environments how to code. And it's started to reemerge recently as something that I think people are really interested in, because we've had to move to remote schooling, because kids are on the computer all the time. There are a lot of parents that are saying, oh, wait, if my child's going to be on a computer all the time, maybe they should learn how to code. Maybe they should learn how to make software. And especially because of all the conversations about social media and the influence of technology in our culture, changing the representation of who's coding is also becoming a really hot topic. Do you see that in your sphere as well? Is that something that you see now, especially with things like Roblox and Minecraft, giving kids the opportunity to code? Are you seeing more diverse kids coming into your program and more diverse folks coming into Schell Games as a result of that trend?
We're certainly, what I feel like has made the biggest difference in creating diversity, I think gender diversity has been that's been the biggest visible change that has sort of successfully happened. And the reason for it, I think, is that we've seen a change in the marketplace. There was a time when the vast majority of games, were created, by males for males. And there was very little attention given to female demographic at all. And that has changed dramatically. I mean, the big change there seems to have stemmed most from mobile games and the success of mobile games. I mean, we started to see trends before that, but that was when it really blew open. And the fact that now we have a world where there are kind of games for everybody has really opened things up. So we've definitely seen that change over the years. The change that needs more help is bringing people of color into the realm of game development. That's something where I think everything still lags. I think there are problems there with representation in the games themselves. There are problems with representation in the studios, and problems with representation in the educational institutions. And so that's where that feels like that's where the most work to do is next.
It does feel like we have a real opportunity here, though, in that way, right? Like there are so many people now that can see that when you really do take away the systems that connect people in physical space, that your network becomes very limited in some cases, right? Like if you're not already part of the games industry right now and you have a great idea and you want to pitch it, like how are you going to pitch it? And if you are a student and you really want to make a great game with other people, but you can't go to GDC and go to the IGDA booth and hang out, how are you going to meet those people? And I think this is it's an interesting opportunity, at least, to really reassess kind of access, not just to jobs, but to the actual industry itself, right? To the network of people like you and me that have connections and can help. How do you think we should expand our access in those ways? Like, have you been able to work on this at Schell and at CMU? Like, what are some lessons that you can share with the audience about how to make inroads in that space?
Well, the biggest change by far in terms of the realm of welcoming people into the industry, it is all about the internet and social media. I remember when I grew up very interested in games. I'm fascinated with games of all kinds. Started programming games when I was maybe 12 years old, and was seriously looking at a career in computer science, but it never occurred to me to seriously pursue a career in video games, even though it was something it would be something I would have loved to do. I just had zero access to it. In the 1980s on the East Coast, like, not only didn't I know anybody, I didn't even know anybody who knew anybody. And then I started going to an engineering school and studying computer science, and I still didn't know anybody who knew anybody who was actually in the game industry. But it's really different now in the world of the internet, where it's rare you can find a game where you can't actually see interviews with the people who created the game, or find some way to kind of interact and contact them. That's much more open, not to mention that we now have these communities of amateur creators who can all connect to each other. That was, again, something that was we would get. I remember going to the Southern Massachusetts Atari Users Group, SMOG, in in the 80s. We gather in a library basement once a week and show each other, once a month, and show each other the programs we worked on. That was the best we could do. But that's all changed now. There's so much initiative. There's so much opportunity for people who want to make those connections. And honestly, I think this is the biggest cultural shift that is happening in the world right now, and people don't comprehend it, is that curious people who are willing to take initiative have this insane advantage here in the 21st century, because they can teach themselves what they want to learn, connect with the people who are important to them, and kind of build the life they want to build. Whereas people who are waiting for the system to tell them what to do and what to focus on and how to succeed in life, they are getting left behind badly, because that's not how you succeed in this time period. So,
yeah, actually, the research that's been done also on adverse childhood experiences, early childhood experiences, shows that the brain development and the social development of people who are in situations where they experience adversity is also impacted in such a way that they're much less likely to even begin from that place of curiosity. So it's like a systemic issue from the very early age of those kids, right? And so it's actually really interesting to think about it from that perspective. What does it mean to be a curious kid, and how do you get that sense of self-confidence and sense of being able to learn? And how do we engage kids early enough so that they can see themselves in that light? Yep. And not see themselves either in opposition to or waiting for the system to take care of them. I think it's been really interesting. Actually, there's a lot of stuff going on in the Black Lives Matter movement with younger women who are leading that movement. And some of the more interesting folks that I follow on Instagram, they have a pretty strong message around: don't wait for someone to fix it for you. Don't wait to elect someone to fix it for you. Don't wait for someone to tell you how to make it better in your community. Just start organizing in your community and make a difference in your community. And I guess part of me just really hopes that making games and making programs and making software becomes an essential part of that strategy,
Yeah, I think there's a real obligation on people who make things to kind of open up that process to the communities that are important to them. Because if you can do that, if you can become accessible and become available and invite people in, it can make a real difference in people's lives. I know I've tried to do this myself in various ways. Partly that's some of the focus at the the ETC at Carnegie Mellon. Partly writing The Art of Game Design was a way to try and invite more people in. At our studio, we try and have frequent open house sessions that are designed to kind of invite people in to actually talk and meet with game developers, and we try and get a lot of young people involved in that, and particularly underrepresented groups that are part of that, because it's most people don't realize how if people who are kind of developers in the industry, it's easy to forget how important that first contact can be, and how it doesn't take much to open a door and invite somebody in. Little things can make a big change in somebody's life.
Who was someone that had that kind of an influence in your life?
I would say a friend of mine, his father, Stanley McGinley, was the only computer programmer I knew growing up. And I remember he came to school one day on, talk about your career day, and he talked about what it was to be a computer programmer. And that was an important moment for me, because I remember kind of like that was the moment where it was like, oh, this can be a career, and you can make this sort of a meaningful focus of your life. And so I used to, my friend Jeff, Stanley's son, I would go over to his house, and Stanley always had interesting things. Again, pre-internet, right? We didn't have memes back then, but what people would do is they would share files, and they would print out these various weird files. And I remember seeing a transcription of the ELIZA program, which was one of the first chatbots. And I was just blown away at this notion that a computer could somehow have a conversation with a person. And so, yeah, that really set a path for me. Just that, I remember that moment sitting there with Jeff and looking over this printout when I was a kid. And when I got older, I got kind of obsessed with the ELIZA program, and I remember being older in high school and staying up late at night trying to decode it and trying to understand how is this possible that a chatbot can work. And then once I got into college, I saw an opportunity to take a class in natural language programming, and it was a grad level class, and I was an undergrad student, and so I shouldn't really be taking that class, but I went and knocked on the professor's door and explained my interest, and she was really skeptical. And she said, well, I don't know, do you know anything about this? And I told her about my fascination with ELIZA and how I decoded it and some of the techniques I'd figured out. And she's like, oh, okay, all right, I guess you're into the class. And that set me on a path toward AI. And that led me to Bell Labs, and Bell Labs sent me to graduate school where I started learning about virtual reality. So you can connect these dots backwards a lot of times to these little moments that really can make a big difference for somebody.
It's so important, I think, to sort of stress, especially for younger people who may be out there listening and thinking oh, Robin and Jesse, they seem like they're so successful and that's probably all part of a big plan. It's not a big plan. It's very rarely a big plan. It often is following one's bliss, right? And it's a hard lesson to learn unless you do it. Yeah. And I guess getting motivated to do it has to come from conversations like these, So if you were able to sort of, zap a piece of knowledge into the mind of a listener, what would you share in terms of sort of thinking about how to plan a career or build a career in the gaming space and in the space of interactive entertainment, which is much broader than just games?
Yeah, the thing I would say, this is the thing I talk to my students about all the time, and it's a really hard piece of advice for people to take, but I've watched it change people's lives. All you need to do is you need to pick something and pursue it. That's all you need to do. You don't need to figure it out. You don't need to know the future. You don't need to pick the right thing. You just need to pick the thing that is interesting to you right now and pursue it diligently. Because when you do that, the world will change its relationship with you. I think of a great example. Shauna Tellerman was a student, one of my early students at the ETC, and she'd had a background in art. And her big dream was she wanted to be an artist on the Sims team because she loved the Sims. She thought the Sims was great. She wanted to be an artist on the Sims team. And so it was coming time for summer, and she was looking for internships, and she applies for an internship with the Sims team. And they say, yep, we don't have any art internships. However, you seem very organized. We have a production internship. Would you like to maybe be an assistant producer on The Sims? And she came to me kind of concerned. She's like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to organize schedules and stuff. That's not what I want to do.
I want to be an artist.
Yeah, my dream was to be an artist on The Sims. And I said, well, okay, I get that, but you have such a passion for this product, and it's just an internship. It's just 3 months. This is going to be an opportunity for you to get to know the team, get to know the product, get to see how they work. As a producer, you're going to have a visibility that an artist who just kind of has to sit there and make assets, a producer is going to get to see things and see parts of the team that you wouldn't normally get to see. So I mean, you could pick something else, but I'd encourage you, if they're putting this out there, I think you could do well with this. And so she thought it over and decided, okay, she'd give it a try. At the end of the summer, she comes back to school, and I said, well, how did the internship go? And she says, well, it was really surprising. It turns out I really like being a producer. And okay, so she learned that about herself. And then the thing she ended up doing next, she became really interested in games for training. And she ended up starting a startup where she became the CEO of a company that did firefighter training simulations. And she did that for a few years and sold it to Autodesk. And then she went to work for Google, helping them figure out which companies to invest in. And now she's started up her own new startup called Modsy, which is a thing where you take pictures of the interior of your house and submit them to Modsy, and Modsy creates a 3D model of it and sends back suggestions for how to decorate your house. And Modsy is incredibly successful. And I look at that path, and it's like, so okay, so here's Shauna, multiple successful CEO, but that wasn't her plan.
Exactly.
But how did she get there? She got there because she picked something she was interested in, and she chased it, and the rest of the world helped her find where she should be. And I had a very similar experience. I tried to pursue artificial intelligence, and that led me to the world that I'm in now. When I talk to students who say, I sent out 300 resumes, but I haven't gotten anything, I'm like, you're crazy. Why would you send out 300 resumes? You should be having a much smaller interest zone. You should be focusing on what is it that you would most want to do and chase that. Because if you're like, I'd do anything, no one can help you. No one knows where to put you. No one feels like you're very interested or motivated in anything in particular. But if you're interested in one or two things in particular, the world is going to try and help you get somewhere.
It's a really interesting perspective to think about it as more of a creating enough magnetism in your personality and in your brain and your heart to attract the right opportunities, rather than thinking about it as sort of trying to push out into lots of different spaces to find a single little ping. If you think about it in terms of attracting what you want and getting to the space where you have enough power to do that, you've got to build up your battery, and then you've got to start to make that charge. And the way that you do it is by practicing and getting passionate. I certainly had the same experience. I was in AI, as you know, and then ended up at The Sims, and then that led to me being the person that I am today, who is a teacher and a CEO. And if you had told me when I was 26 that I would end up building a business from scratch, I don't think that I would have believed you.
Yeah, right.
But following that passion about it, for me, it was, can machines tell stories? Can machines connect with people? Can game make you cry? Can VR make you cry? Like, these are the things that I am still obsessed with to this day. But, my day-to-day reality is that I'm focused on sponsoring young people and creating opportunities for them to be able to do that research in that space. And enabling others has become a huge focus for me, which I just never would have thought I had the capacity, honestly, to be able to create that many jobs. As a young girl, a single young woman in computer science, often the only woman in my class. If you had told me that I would have that capacity, I don't think I would have believed it, mostly because I had never seen it. And I think that's what's so special about your example, is that not only is she creating opportunities and building technologies that are changing the world, but she's also an example of someone who does that. And she's someone that you can hold up, on a podcast like this and say, it's possible. It's not only possible, it's probable if you are passionate and you can find that time, and I think it's a really interesting time to be around. How do you think we will move forward from this time and create just new things? Do you think that we'll see a wave of new invention coming from the constraint of COVID?
I do think so. I think I know I always tend to be optimistic and look for the good things that are going to come out of tough situations. But I think realistically we are going to have some of those good things. I think there's been a real resistance to remote work and to communicating online in a professional way that has been there for good reasons. And we've suddenly been thrust into a situation where we're forced to experiment and learn about, well, okay, it might not be a piece of cake, but some things work better than others, and what works and what doesn't work. So we have that whole realm of, I think people are going to be experimenting with new ways to communicate online. They're going to be more comfortable with getting educated online, doing social experiences online, doing hybrid experiences where some people are online but some people are offline. I think we're gonna see a lot of that realm of experience. And then I think there's a whole other side to this. I think the combination of unemployment, work from home, has given a lot of people reason to do a little more introspection about, well, wait a minute, now that I actually have a moment to sort of stop and think, what do I actually want my life to be? And so I think we're going to see a lot of interesting things sort of blossom out as people one day can open their doors and go outside again.
So that actually brings me to one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, which is the idea of reflection, Buddhism, meditation, and being centered. I know you are also someone who sits and tries to be present in the moment each day. How has that helped you in this time, and how has it helped you just in general, being in such a dynamic and changing industry?
No, that's a great question. I guess I'd say in a really multidimensional way. I've been someone who'd always been interested in meditation, and I started kind of dabbling with it when I was maybe in my 20s. But I don't think it was until I was maybe in my early 40s that I got more serious about it, because I'd always liked doing it, but I never quite stuck with it. And then I heard someone say, if you meditate every day for a month, you'll do it for the rest of your life. You won't be able to help it. And I thought, well, I don't know if I believe that, but that's an easy thing to try. And I tried it and found out, like, oh, yes, it's actually quite hard to want to stop having this in your life. And so I've certainly found that this time at home has given me a lot more time to reflect on a lot of things. So I think just personally, I've had a little more time to understand myself better during this time, and I think that's helped me both personally and professionally. Sort of understanding some of the things, for me, it's partly been long-term anxieties that I've had that I never even realized were there. They were so part of my life that I didn't even know how much they were kind of manipulating me and controlling me. And to be able to start to see that better and understand how to change that has been really helpful. And those things help in kind of the working world as well. There are a lot of things I used to get I would have a lot of anxiety about at work. Or like, oh no, this project's not going the right way, or this client is upset. And these things would seem like real end of the world situations, or no, these two employees are fighting, and oh my God, it's a big deal, and how am I going to deal with it? And I've found that kind of being in reality, being in the kind of the real world, the real moment, the real present that is really here, and getting perspective of, well, yes, of course things are always changing, and yes, of course people are upset sometimes, but it doesn't mean they're going to be upset forever, and we can just talk about it. It's okay.
I think there's some general sense that I get from people in my life who practice that their awareness of their processes is both expanded, but also that there are so many small ways in which your desire to control outcomes will influence your behavior. And in the very busy world where you're constantly in meetings and emailing and traveling and pitching and you're always on the go, it's so much activity that those little snags kind of don't register. They don't feel like the hooks that they are. You're already so caffeinated and tired, and you're trying to do 1,000 things at once. And it seems to me like, and I don't know if it seems this way to you, but the cognitive load of the pandemic plus the state of the world with the environment and the politics of whatever local context you're in, which is often really stressful in and of itself, because politics is stress, because politics is conversation about change, which is so hard for humans. Like, now that there's so much, allostatic load, there's such a cognitive load, physical load of having to deal with the big three, your local politics, the environment, and then COVID, that people really can't do as much. And now that they can't do as much, they have to sense a lot more what they're actually feeling. Like, those little hooks are suddenly quite large, and they become very prominent. And so if you sit, maybe you have the ability to at least deal with a few more of those than you would have in the past.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. The extent to which people are not able to just sit with themselves is such a huge source of the world's problems. And I think people don't realize, I think for so many of the things that people do, they don't realize their actual motivation for what they do, what they're doing.
Yeah.
And over time, I know I've learned that there's a huge difference between sitting down to watch a television program because you're like, wow, I'm really interested in this, and I want to see this. I'm eager to see this, and that's very different than, wow, I'm kind of itchy because I'm not comfortable sitting here with nothing to do by myself. Let me just go see what's on so that I don't have to actually be here with myself. Oh, I kind of like this show. I'll focus on this show now. Going into a thing because you're trying to escape your own feelings of discomfort is really different than going to it because, oh, this is a thing I'd like to do right now. And that's a very, I don't know, that's a subtle kind of awareness. And I've personally found that to be very life-changing, the ability to, even though I'm often doing the same things, like externally you wouldn't see a difference, but when you're escaping yourself, that leads to an awful lot of unhealthy behavior. But when you're comfortable with yourself and then pursuing the things that are true to yourself, everything becomes stronger. And you not only are you healthier and happier, but because you have that security and that calmness, you can be a better support for others because you're comfortable in a way that you can sometimes help them in the times that they're not comfortable.
Yeah, I think it's a really exceptional skill for leadership because so many people right now, if you're leading a group, so many people have real problems with, say, home parenting, elderly parents who they can't see, trying to raise a new child in an environment where you can't take your kid out of the house, being a new first-time parent and having literally no way to connect with other parents personally in a context where you can privately explain how crazy you feel because you can't sleep. There's so many contexts around just being a normal human right now that are so difficult for people. And if you're a leader, you end up shouldering some of that burden because it's your job to make sure that work is not getting in the way of other people's mental health or creativity or ability to support their own families. And I think if you can sit a little bit, you can at least sort of offload some of your own crap so that you can make a little room in your bucket for other people. And I think it's a hard thing to do. Like you said, if you don't do it regularly, it feels like, and even if you do it regularly, but you've been doing it for a while, sometimes it doesn't feel so great because it's just like, wow, I'm still worried about those same 5 things. Like, when am I going to stop being worried about those dumb 5 things? It's important.
I think that's the biggest challenge for people with meditating is they often feel like they're failing. I mean, it's one thing you do guided meditation where someone tells you, think about this, focus on that. But when you do, silent meditation, you're just going to sit there and you're just going to observe. It's easy to feel like a failure because, yes, you're going to get carried away by your thoughts sometimes. I think the secret very much is to accept that yes, that's going to happen sometimes. And then when you notice it, okay, then you change that and let that go. And it's honestly, I feel like that's where the real strength comes from. It is from that moment where you realize, oh, I'm being carried away by my thoughts. I will let go of them right now.
Yeah.
Practicing that noticing and practicing that letting go, I find that's where the center of the value is. So ironically, the part that people struggle with is actually the part that can make you strong if you can accept that, that's challenging. That's hard to do.
It's the meat. Yeah. I think Sharon Salzberg said it recently in a talk that I saw her give, which was that like the number one skill that meditation gave her was the ability to recenter herself in the moment, just to get back on some kind of a track. And she said, I use that skill every day, all day. Like I'm a master meditator and I'm basically only just righting the ship. I'm just nudging myself back into equilibrium most of the time. And, to hear someone who's been meditating since 1960 something, say that, goes, okay, well then maybe I'm not so bad at this.
Yeah. Minds are complicated. The poor computers don't know what they're in for.
It's so true. Jesse, it has been such a fantastic hour talking with you. I really appreciate you taking the time. I wish you very well in these COVID times. And please keep us posted about all of your progress on this fantastic VR. Maybe you guys will be the ones that make a VR that makes us cry.
Yeah, we'll see.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.